Well, greetings, friends, and welcome back to the podcast of Denver United Methodist Church with that guy right there, the pastor Steve.Autrey and Paul Thompson at Huntersville United Methodist Church, as we together in our churches read the Bible through together in a year. And Steve, I'm not really sure what possessed us to do that. I hope it was God's Spirit. But as we continue to read through, this is I'm continually fascinated by the stark, dark nature of a lot of what we're reading, and how the Bible doesn't seem to hide it.
No,
it seems to present it in all its reality.
It really does. There's no spin control here, and no cleaning it up. And so when we read these stories, and this is part of the reason why we're trying to read the Bible through in a year, is to put these stories in the context of the larger picture. When we just take them out a piece at a time, let's say you just take out the story of David and Goliath, and you can take out the story of David being anointed, then you take out this and that, and you just hold them out separately. You don't
get the full picture.
You don't get the full picture of just how challenging and how dicey, chaotic, dark that some of this is. And I don't mean to depress you. We've got enough in our world to depress us. Don't need help from me. But where I see the hope in this is that God's been working with broken, dark people, and God constantly works in and through and around the chaos that we create to constantly bring about something better. And so that's where the hope is that, it was a mess then. You can look at things and go, wow, it's a mess now. But in some ways, it's always been a mess. But God's constantly bringing forth the kingdom and a new creation. And I don't think we should lose sight of that, because that is the goal. I mean, God, the renewal of all things, the restoration of all things, the making right of all things. That's good news. And so, but it helps us to go look and see how God has been working in and through all this stuff through all these years. So, we've been talking a lot about David lately. No, you're moving on to the temple this week. I'm going to be looking at the story of David and Goliath, but so we're off just a little bit. That shouldn't surprise anybody.
So let's talk a little bit about David and include the story of Goliath. There is no more central figure. Moses, David seem to be, for me, the two people around whom a lot of this Old Testament story is written. David has assumed the kingship by this time in your reading. David has begun to make preparation that he will become the king of both the tribe of Judah, and then after a couple of year period, he will also ascend to the kingship of the entire nation of Israel, including all of the 12 tribes.
And that's important to note, because the tribal loyalty was very strong. Mm-hmm. And David comes from the tribe of Judah, which is the largest, most powerful tribe. If you remember, where did Saul come from?
Saul was from Benjamin,
which was the weakest and most reviled tribe. Mm-hmm. So in some ways, Saul was set up for failure from the beginning, in a sense, because he couldn't call on his own people in times of need. He had to always make sure Judah was happy with what he was doing.
So we have intrigue. As Saul dies, if you remember, Saul is said by God to have kind of been rejected, and so no longer will he be king. Saul eventually dies in battle
with the Philistines.
Kills himself, kills himself.
Well, and that's an interesting thing. He falls on his own sword, but you have to realize that if Saul had been captured, what they did to these captured kings, it was brutal.
Would not have been pretty.
No, it's like it would have been so horrific. So he falls on his own sword versus being tortured to death over a long period of time.
So David, who has risen to prominence both in and throughout the entire land, begins to plan to take over the entirety, and there's political intrigue. There is a king, a son of Saul named Ishbosheth, who is anointed by Abner, the general of the armies of Israel. And after 2 years, ultimately, he's rejected, and David is being very, very politically astute, and he does things that bring favor to him in the eyes of the people called Israel. And so after a while, he is anointed as king over all Israel, and this is the first time that anyone can say they are king over the entire people.
Right. And that is a big deal, because to unite these group of tribes under one banner, and it doesn't stay that way long. So what we'll find, and what's remarkable to me about the nation of Israel as a political entity, take out the theology if you can for a minute, but politically, Israel is a nobody. And throughout most of their history, Israel has been an insignificant little blip on the world stage. The only time that they had any political power or clout would have been during the time of David and Solomon.
Yeah. And for the 80 years, roughly 80 years that Israel was unified as a kingdom, they did have some political prominence, but let's be clear, in no way did they really have much influence in the known world.
Right. And if it weren't for the theological contributions, if it wasn't for the God of Israel wouldn't, you wouldn't even be talking about them. And that's a fascinating thing to me, because their power, political power, military power, never could even come close to rivaling Egypt or Babylon or Assyria or the Greek city-states or Rome, or never. They were always, at least politically and militarily, rather insignificant.
So Steve and I were having a little conversation ahead of this, and it is important to understand David in David's full context. David is both an amazing character. He has this flair. He has this ability, influence, but he's also shrewd. And I think he was
a good dancer.
And he's a great dancer, but he's shrewd. One of his first things is he wants to bring a unified capital. And he decides that unified capital should be in this place, Jerusalem. And he actually goes and attacks and secures this place called Jerusalem from the Jebusites. And it is an important, politically shrewd move to move the capital from what would have been the religious shrine of Shiloh, from the political shrine of Hebron. David brings and unifies the kingdom as Jerusalem as the capital.
So he's consolidating political and theological power. Is that fair to say?
That is fair to say, and that is exactly what David does.
Well, and he does that by bringing the ark to Jerusalem, and that's where he dances, by the way.
So in this fascinating story, I hope you've read it, and if you haven't, go back and reread it. It's fascinating. David, with great pomp and circumstance, decides to bring the Ark of the Covenant. Again, that mobile, it has the Ark, has the Ten Commandments in it. It's considered this place where God's presence has been mobile with the people in the wilderness. So now David decides it's important to bring that Ark to Jerusalem, and he's going to make it kind of a permanent place where God's presence will be. And God allows it, but says, but don't make the mistake of thinking that somehow you've contained me.
Yeah. And that's going to be an ongoing theme, because David starts the work of building a temple. And if you've ever built anything, you know how long it takes. And so the planning begins with David, but God says, David, you're not going to build this temple for me. Why do you think that is the case?
Well, I think David certainly has blood on his hands. David has been that warrior first. Going back to that story you're going to talk about with Goliath. I mean, even from a young man, he goes out and he kills Goliath, and that's where his reputation is made as this warrior figure.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's also, I think, It's God's way of saying, "No, David, my story's bigger than yours, and my story will transcend you. It will continue beyond you." So the building of the temple then is handed over to Solomon upon David's death.
So last week I mentioned that David assumes the threefold office of prophet, priest, and king. I think that's really still important for us today to think about, even as David brings this Ark of the Covenant and settles it in Jerusalem. If you go back and reread the story where David brings the Ark, he dons the high priest ephod, and he is dancing before the Ark. He's doing cartwheels. He is dancing with all of his might. And if you remember the story, Saul's daughter, Michal, who David had married more out of political shrewd move, Michal is watching, and she despises David. She hates him as she watches him dance, and even calls him up. They have a conversation, and she said, "Well, didn't you really you just really made a fool of yourself before all of these people." And I love David's response, and I think it fits in with this idea of humility. David both says that I am willing to humiliate myself if that's what it means. And I think if we ever have an idea about what does it mean to me, David, a man after God's own heart, I think it means that David was able to worship God. David would even humiliate himself before God if that's what it took. But he had this ability to really, he never worshiped the other gods. He was really true to the God of Israel.
And that's key too, that he never worshiped the other gods. When you read through the Judges, you'll see so many of them will end up co-opting the faith of Israel by worshiping other gods. And when we get into we'll get into a section where we just see king after king after king after king, and almost all of them go after other gods. But this idea of David remaining faithful, even though David made huge mistakes and David had a major moral failings.
Let's talk a little bit about those major moral failings. When I read the story of David, sometimes I feel a little better about myself, just in comparison. David really, we know that David eventually he has an affair with Bathsheba.
And here's one of the problems of being king: you start to enjoy being king.
Power corrupts. Absolute power corrupts. Absolutely.
And so we get to the story of David and Bathsheba. And if you remember how that story starts?
Yeah, so David is sitting up on top of the palace while his soldiers are out at battle.
Right, but even that begins. It begins in a very kind of ominous way. That in the time of the year when kings would go out to do battle, right? So it's almost like a little bit of a shade from the beginning, because David should have been out with his right. The king goes out to battle with your army, but David's might and prominence had gotten to the point where I guess he just here it is, 11:1, 2 Samuel 11:1. In the spring of the year, the time when kings go out to battle, David sent Joab with his officers. So it's like, yeah, it's springtime. I know we'll go out. This is the time of year to go out and make war. It's a weird thing to even have that time. I guess it's like March Madness.
Yeah. It's like, we're going to go out and have a few fights.
Let's go out and fight some people. But Joab, go take care of it. I'm just going to hang out and chill at home. And it's, he's kind of, again, and this is one of the struggles of forgetting where you come from, forgetting yourself. You mentioned David, the humility that he displays when he's dancing in front of the ark. And he's like, I don't care if I make a fool of myself for God. Well, now he's in a different headspace, and he's beginning to become somebody different.
He's a little power drunk now.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
So David, in that story, David goes and takes Bathsheba from her home, brings her to him.
And the story is like super crisp, and pay attention to how it moves, because this is And if you got a few minutes, look at 11:4. So David sent. He takes. He lays with her, and she returns. Right, and it's like David's the king. He sent for her. She has no choice. Right, and so many times we've kind of made Bathsheba into this kind of harlot almost, but the woman had no choice.
Power was the right before her. Yeah.
Right, and who's. Yeah, she's a subject of the king, and the king sends for you. You know, we don't know her motivation, but she would have had very little ability to do anything in this situation. So, again, David's not where he's supposed to be. He falls into his passions and his lust. He sends for her, and boom. That's been done.
And then to finish the loop, David finds that she's pregnant, so he needs to bring the Uriah the Hittite home to sleep with his wife to cover up his mistake.
So why does the Bible tell us that Uriah was a Hittite?
That's a great question. Do you know the answer to that?
Well, it's interesting because the Hittite is a foreigner, right? And and who is faithful in this story? It's Uriah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the one who's supposed to be faithful is not the one who is not supposed to be trusted. The outsider is. So Uriah, he calls Uriah home and says, "Oh, by the way, I just want to report from the front lines." Uriah gives him that, and he goes, "Oh, but while you're home, why don't you should go see your wife."
Go have a conjugal visit with your wife, and Uriah's like, I can't do that. Not while my boys are out fighting.
Yeah,
and
so he sleeps on the ground.
Yeah, sleeps on the ground in front of the palace, and
it's Uriah's integrity that gets him killed, because David's like, well, that first part of that cover up didn't work. That would have been the easy thing, right?
Yeah,
pass off the child as Uriah's. But then David comes to Joab, who's the leader of the armies, and says, sends him a note and says, put Uriah at the front of the fighting, and when it's engaged, draw back. And the message is very clear. You know, Joab knows exactly what David wants. David wants Uriah dead, and Joab's like, okay, let's get it done.
So in a Watergate type cover up, they do this, and David thinks, okay, we've got by with this. This is past me. Okay, I'm moving on, until Nathan, the prophet, walks in, and that fascinating story about the one man who had the one little lamb, and he just loved that lamb, and another rich guy had all these other sheep and lambs, but the rich guy wanted that poor guy's lamb. And David hears this parable, this story, and says, tell me who that is. I'll kill this guy. Nathan looks at David and says, David, that's you.
You're the man.
You're the man. So these fascinating stories, the Bible does not, even a man after God's own heart, the guy who the Bible holds up as a real exemplary figure of faithfulness, this is David. And we look at him and we think, man, suddenly maybe my life is not quite as bad as that. But it is interesting how the Bible does not sanitize. No. It is clear. We read all of these stories of murder, these stories of political intrigue.
Which can be very different from how we treat our historical figures. Mm-hmm. Do you remember the story of George Washington cutting down the cherry tree?
We often tell that apocryphal story.
And then he says he cut down his father's, if you haven't heard it, cut down his father's cherry tree, and his father said, who cut down the cherry tree? And George Washington says, I cannot tell a lie, it was me. Well, that never happened.
Right.
We tell stories about, we want to elevate and clean up our heroes and sanitize our heroes. The Bible doesn't do that. It tells you the good, the bad, and the ugly. And there's a lot of good in David's story. There's a lot of bad, and there's some real ugly at the same time. And that's one of the things I hope you're seeing as you read through these scriptures, as you encounter these people, is they are human beings. They struggle with the same things we do. They have hopes, dreams, desires. They want to be faithful at times. Other times they really struggle with being faithful. They put their hope in God on some days, and then they put their hope in themselves on other days. But we should learn from that.
Well, these are important lessons. So just as we kind of make preparation for this coming Sunday at Huntersville, so David he builds himself this great palace. He's got this beautiful house that David's built, and then begins to think, maybe I should do something for God.
Right. It even becomes known as the city of David, right?
Yeah, Jerusalem becomes known as the city of David. And then David ponders, and maybe we should build a house for God. He consults with Nathan the prophet, and Nathan says, yeah, I think it's a great idea, but then has a dream, comes back the next day and says, no, David, that won't be you who does that. That'll have to be your son. But David begins to make preparation for this house of the Lord, this temple that's going to be built, does a long series of securing the materials that are ultimately going to be used, but it is left to Solomon, David's son, to actually build the temple. We're going to explore at Huntersville this Sunday what all the temple represent, the history of the temple, and the fascinating connection that even still today, the temple is at the forefront of political activity today. The place where the temple used to sit, the Dome of the Rock, is an Islamic mosque, sits in the very place where the temple once stood. And the idea is that one of these days there will be a third temple that will be built at that very site, which means the Dome of the Rock would need to be torn down. And what that would mean would be World War III. But a lot of people associate that would then signal the coming of the Messiah when this third temple is built. So even today, the temple is at the forefront of a lot of our politics, a lot of our international intrigue about what will happen. So as politics and religion are written together in these ways, that's kind of where we're going Sunday, to talk about the history of the temple, the importance of the temple, and how it was seen by the people called Israel. If that's where God lives, then nobody can ever touch us.
Sounds like you already preached it.
Well, I hope I at least maybe whet your appetite for a little bit, because it is a fascinating story to think about the temple. I remember you and I were there in 2014, and we got to kneel and pray at the Wailing Wall.
And that's the foundational stones that are still there from the time of Solomon, which is pretty incredible. And they're some big rocks.
Yeah, some big rocks, and the outside wall this would have represented. So tell me, what were you thinking between your story of David and Goliath on Sunday? What the appetite of the folks of Denver?
It's a good story. You should come listen to it.
Yeah.
It is. But we often think we know the story because we've only heard it in maybe Vacation Bible School, or everybody. And it's one of those stories that jumps from the religious world into all other areas. People know the story, whether they're Christian or Jewish or not, know the story of David and Goliath. It's almost an archetypal story of the underdog taking on great odds. And how many times has the story of David and Goliath been used before a sporting match when the coach knows they're undermatched? Those guys are bigger and tougher, but remember David, and Goliath. But there's so much more to the story than just a hero's journey. And so we're going to take a look at that. And also we're going to talk a lot about the value of being who God created you to be. Because that's in this story of if David tried to be something other than himself, he would have been killed by Goliath. It's only in his power to be fully who God has called him to be that he is able to overcome the giant.
And that will preach right there.
I sure hope so.
Yeah, that'll be a good story. So I also wanted to whet your appetite for next Wednesday, the 26th of March. This man, Steve, is going to join me at Huntersville United Methodist Church. We're going to have a lunch, and we're going to invite you to come and ask your questions. Are you invited?
If anybody wants to wander over here from Denver?
Absolutely. We will
love
feed
to have
you a sandwich and love to have you. So we're just going to be there. We're going to open the conversation up with just a little sense of where we are. But love to have a little conversation with you about what you're reading, questions that you may have. So that'll be at noon at Huntersville United Methodist Church on Wednesday, March the 26th. If nothing else, you come get an autograph from the pastor, Steve.Autrey.
Those are very much sought after. I stopped doing shows a while back because I was devaluing the value of my autograph.
I understand.
So I've been trying to change that.
Yeah.
So,
and so tell me about Denver this coming Sunday.
9 and 11, and pretty much a kind of a, it's an interesting. We're plowing through March. So again, 9/11 Sunday school hour in between. If you are interested in joining a group, I lead a Sunday school class in between the services. So love to have you.
Well, aren't you something?
I am. I'm a workhorse, brother.
You are a warrior.
Yeah, that's me. So, but do want to just plant the seed for the 5th Sunday that's coming up, that we will have a combined service on the 5th Sunday of March at 10 o'clock in our sanctuary with a fellowship meal to follow.
Well, that's big. So this coming Sunday at Huntersville is our typical 8:30 and 10:30 services. I hope that you'll plan to join us. We do on April 6th, the first Sunday of the next month, we'll have our unity service, combined service with food ahead of time.
And this Sunday, Pastor Paul is going to put on an ephod and dance in front of the Lord.
Don't even start those vicious rumors, because that would be a visual that nobody wants to see, and that would just run people out the door.
I don't know. You may have a packed house.
Well, I can promise you that is not going to
viral.
happen. Yeah, that would go viral, but it would not be good. Folks, we really hope that as we plow through some really difficult reading, I hope that you are able to make some connections between these fascinating stories in the Old Testament, what we call the Old Testament, probably a misnomer, but these stories, they are a part of the revelation of God. And again, before we get to the New Testament, you just have to have a real sense of these stories and how they connect. I hope this is helping you do that.
Yeah. Thank you for being with us.
We look forward to seeing you. Thanks.